So, morning everybody. First, let's start with this. I'm hoping many of you in the audience know who this is. Yeah? Benjamin Franklin. So he's one of the founding forefathers of the United States, and to all intents and purposes was a bit of a genius. He, within his career, did a lot of different things. So he was an author, a printer, a postmaster, he was a politician, but he also was a scientist and an inventor. In fact, it's thanks to Benjamin Franklin that we have devices such as the lightning rod and, believe it or not, bifocal glasses. Who knew? Yeah? But there's another thing which I found fascinating about Benjamin Franklin. It's the fact that he's one of the most quoted people in all of history. He's actually, in many respects, a gold mine of amazing phrases. So examples include, honesty is the best policy. Time is money. This one I like, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And then how about this one? This is great. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn. That's pretty much modern education theory. Most people would agree. But maybe I'm really showing my bias here. The one that for me stands out above all other quotes is this one. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Or I guess as we now popularly know it, prevention is better than cure. If I may, I'm going to come back to prevention at the end of the talk and wrap it up. But really what I hope you get a flavour of from Gary's excellent presentation is the potential that monitoring growth has, hopefully, to prove health and potentially identify abnormal growth and therefore problems at an early stage. So I think for us as a vet profession, we need to do much more in terms of prevention. And for me, I believe growth monitoring is one of the things which could be key. So what I want to do now is talk you through the culmination of about 4 years of work trying to develop some evidence-based growth standards for dogs. And this is effectively a collaboration between 4 different organisations: Waltham, Banfield, University of Liverpool, and University College London. Most of the studies were done by Karina Salt and Derek Wilson at Waltham in collaboration with Tim Cole at UCL. And again, I'm hoping you get the flavour from Gary's talk that UCL is one of the worldwide centres of excellence for growth monitoring. And what we tried to do throughout was use similar processes for developing charts as have been used for childhood growth standards. So this is what we'll go through. We're going to start by discussing creation of the new charts. We'll go through some phases of validation and then briefly just touch upon production of a tool to help for veterinarians in terms of growth chart monitoring. So first phase, creation. What we've got to do effectively is put some centile curves on a chart, which can then be used. And there's some key things, again, that came out of the WHO project that you need. So firstly, you need a large population of individuals to study. And this is why we chose to approach Banfield for this. I hope the reason for using Banfield is evidence. It is a huge network of veterinary hospitals and with a massive population of dogs at their disposal. The charts we have focus on body weight, so we're not yet there at the point of measuring dimensions and length. And what we did here for this project was we took age and body weight data from dogs attending Banfield. Okay. Now this actually, in terms of giving you an idea of scale, gave us around about 20 million data points from about 4 million dogs. So it's a big bunch of data to use. Second thing, Gary alluded to the fact that you have growth references and growth standards, Ideally, what we wanted to do was achieve something which was akin to a growth standard, so something which was showing healthy growth, not just reflecting growth as is at the moment. So to do this, what we did was select information and data from dogs that we knew didn't have any illnesses within the first 3 years of life, and actually had remained in ideal body weight. So if they were underweight or reported to be overweight, we excluded them. If we weren't sure, we excluded the data as well. So you lose a fair bit of data, but you still have a massive amount of data to work with. Second thing then is the process of generating the curves. And I'm only going to briefly touch upon this, but effectively the methods that we use for the growth standards in children have been used. So there are processes including data cleaning, then the mathematical modeling. We used general additive models of linear size and scale, and then you do some curve smoothing and fitting in order to try to get those centile lines on your curve. And this graphic here really just illustrates that process. So you start with a large body of data. You produce, the first bit that you produce is, excuse me, there we go. You produce initial curves which are a little bit bumpy, and then the process of smoothing essentially just flattens those curves out to give hopefully what is the line of best fit, and you end up with a series of what we call centile lines on that curve. Now, one of the things that Gary alluded to in his presentation was the fact that you have to take account of known differences in your population. So for the WHO childhood charts, obviously there are different ones for boys and girls because they grow differently. And Gary did also talk a lot about potential effects of puberty and differences there. In the many respects, in the veterinary profession, we have much greater complexity because we have neutering. And so it was very important for us to look at, well, what effect could neutering have on potential growth? Usually, neutering occurs during the growth phase, and it can occur almost in more complexity, can occur at any stage. So a lot of what we did was actually comparing growth between dogs that were entire and dogs that were neutered at some point. This is a complicated slide. It's my most difficult one to explain, so I'll talk you through it. We've got male and female data, and you'll notice for each of those there are 4 different graphs, and that reflects neutering at different ages, from 22 weeks and less, top left, through to 37 weeks and more, top right. And what we're showing here is age on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, this is effectively a Z-score. So it's the difference in growth the average difference in growth of the population of neutered dogs versus dogs that were remain entire. So what we've got, is here the straight lines here, which are the centile lines, flattened. Essentially, that's what the neutered dogs would do. Any deviations up or down reflect either more rapid growth or slower growth compared with entire individuals. I guess if I asked you to predict, people might say different things. So perhaps we'd think neutering would lead to an upwards inclination in growth, because obviously we worry about neutering and the risk of being overweight. Conversely, as Gary alluded to, perhaps it could have a negative impact on how individuals grow. So we're very keen to explore this, and we've got various colours for different breeds. So we looked at this in detail, and I think that for me, the take-home message here is that actually the influence of neutering was quite variable. Perhaps you can see a slight upwards inclination in early neutering and then a downwards drop. And perhaps for later periods of neutering, there's more of a slight downwards drop of growth. But the important thing to recognize actually is that the changes in lines were actually very small. This is well within 1 centile unit on the chart. So I think the conclusion is it's somewhat unpredictable and actually relatively minor. In many respects, it's dwarfed by variability within individuals and between individuals. So what that meant was that if we're looking at healthy neutering, then effectively that didn't look greatly different on average from growth in entire dogs. And if that may still be a bit surprising, remember we have chosen dogs that remained in healthy body weight to 3 years of age. So I suppose what we can say is that growth in that population and healthy growth is hopefully very similar. So that was our first challenge. The second challenge is wanting to, I guess, to try to look at a greater variability within the population we're dealing with. Compared with children, we obviously have a much wider diversity of size and shape when it comes to breeds. So we've got the small toy breeds on the one hand and giant breeds on the other hand. And I guess early on we realized it would be unlikely to have a single set of charts that could reflect growth in all those situations. So I guess we had to then tackle the idea as to how do we reflect that. One option would be to have breed-specific charts, and you could argue the greater advantage there is a greater ability to tailor your chart to the individual. So that's an advantage, perhaps. The disadvantage is if you're looking at multiple breeds, and there are some which may be quite rare, you're unlikely to have enough data in order to create a chart. And secondly, imagine you've got 40 breeds and you've got male and female. That's 80 different charts for a vet professional to handle, and that gets quite complicated. And then finally, what about crossbred dogs, mixed breed dogs? How do you accommodate them? So what we actually did was various studies comparing growth in different breeds. We used some cluster analysis to try to look at patterns of growth in individuals. And ultimately, this allowed us to come up with some size categories here from 1 to 6. And here, within these categories, the breeds that we looked at grew in a similar manner. Then what we did was take the breed curves and compared them with the size category. And we found that for 5 out of 6 of these categories, we found that actually the breed curves were pretty close to the size category. So the size category was fine. Perhaps not surprisingly, giant breeds were more of a challenge. Okay, and that, I suppose most of you who know about growth will know that Great Danes and Newfoundlands and Mastiffs are going to grow in a different way. So in moving forward, one thing we'll need to do is look at some breed-specific charts for them. That being said, up to 40 kilos of, this is adult body size, the 5 size categories actually reflected the breed growth pretty well. And so the culmination of the creation part of the phase was effectively 10 different charts, male and female, for these 5 size categories. So that's creation. So the next thing is you've got charts. Are they going to be any good? So what you need to do next is to look at various approaches to validate the charts you've got. And you can do individual validation, where you take data from individual dogs and compare them with the charts. And you can also do some population level validation, where you're taking populations from different places to compare against the chart, but also maybe not just healthy dogs, those with other problems, maybe those becoming overweight, those with developmental disorders. We did a lot of this, and I haven't got time to show everything, so I'm just going to give you some key examples. I can discuss some of the other validation studies we've done at the end, if you like. So what about individual validation? So you take individuals that you know are healthy, and you plot those measurements on the chart. This is from a different set of dogs from those used to create the charts. And what we find here when you look at individual curves is overall, the majority of individuals actually map to the centile curves pretty well. So they either sort of follow a centile or track between centiles. Some dogs do bounce around, and that's not unexpected. If you look at children, if you're parents and you have your own kids, you'll know that kids don't always follow charts perfectly, but they bounce around. But for the most part, those that we knew to be healthy in the first 3 years of life and beyond were fine. You can then look at individuals you know to be growing too fast, so becoming overweight. And what you see there is that many of those individuals cross centiles upwards. And that's not dissimilar from kids. One of the predictors of being obese later in life is upwards crossing of growth centiles. And you can look at those grown too slow, and you see the opposite is true. If anything, they tend to cross centiles downwards. So that's individual validation. The other thing you can do is, say, look at populations and compare the average difference, a bit like we did for neutering. And I'm going to give you one example of this. This is looking at dogs, groups of dogs that were obese, overweight, and underweight. And these, again, are Z scores, so it's the change in growth in the population relative to the charts. And so you can see in green, obese, there's a tendency for upwards inclination. Likewise for overweight, but less pronounced. Underweight goes down. And to give you an idea of proportions, about 70% of dogs that were obese crossed 2 or more centiles upwards, and about 50% of underweight dogs crossed 2 or more centiles downwards. So it's not perfect, but it does at least give us something to look at. And finally, that's the science. We've got some manuscripts under review and in preparation. But obviously, to have something which is a usable tool for a vet, you need instructions and guidance. I think we'd all agree with that. So here what we did was employ the help of a design team, and we drew inspiration from some of the materials that are available for the WHO charts. So these are the British charts here on the left, and we wanted to create something which had a similar sort of look and feel to these charts. There's also a lot of instructions for health professionals about how to use them, and so we've looked at that and created similar things. And the upshot is that we do now have at least prototypes for what these will look like. Similar sort of book to, in the UK, the Red Book, the dreaded Red Book, as some parents will say, but a lot of other supporting materials to help support the professional, and there's going to be some online information as well. We're looking to launch these within the next 6 months to the vet profession, and it's going to be something that's going to be available to use free of charge within practices. And just to sort of highlight a few things, I think you get the impression from Gary's talk that the aim of producing these charts was to produce something that had a similar look to the human charts. The lines, again, are very similar. And one of the things we do, Gary mentioned the issues about sort of preterm and problems actually in charting with here. The data we used, most of the data was from 12 weeks onwards, so we haven't created validated curves earlier. But that's very much the time, 8 weeks, 6 weeks is when owners will be going to vet practices in terms of trying to sort of start the monitoring. So let's just finish off and come back to that concept I mentioned earlier of prevention being better than cure. I hope you get an idea again from Gary's talk and from what I've shown you that there's some potential here for proactive monitoring of healthy growth. The hope will be that you can spot individuals that are deviating from a normal pattern, and veterinary professionals can then start doing something about it before it's too late. What I believe, though, is that we have a greater potential to do more in terms of prevention. Because currently, we don't do a great job in the veterinary profession about early life care. This is the timeline from birth to 18 months. And as veterinary professionals, we interact at the initial vaccination, then at booster. And if a dog's going to be neutered, some point within there, we may have another interaction. But what that does is lead and leave what I call an early life care vacuum. There's a long period which is very influential both in the dog and the owner's life and period, where as a veterinary profession, we are not engaging with our clients. They need information. Where do you think they're getting it from? Probably spotty teenager in the pet store who's had half a day's training on nutrition. Maybe, their neighbour down the road who had a dog once, or maybe worse, shock horror breeders, okay? Who knows? But in the internet, there's a whole load of things there. I think as a vet profession, we probably need to do more at making sure that our dogs and other animals are actually growing healthily. So if you then look at growth monitoring, what we'd recommend would be Monthly weight checks from 3 months to 6 months, and then 3 monthly afterwards. And you can actually also start earlier to get a few initial ones. And so straight away, I think you can see that there are many more interactions that the vet can have with the owner, not just about growth, but possibly nutrition, parasite control, and behavior, because that's a period where behavioral issues often develop. And finally, just back to Benjamin Franklin. I have to confess I'm not a historian and a Franklin expert, so I did need to make use of the internet, and you can't always trust what the internet tells you. Apparently, Franklin said this. So if you believe that, you believe anything. Thank you very much.